Hello, and welcome to another week of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today, I'm excited. We got the OG crew, and only the OG crew. We've done a guest episode last week, and before that, we had a random live episode from a manga shop. But it's just the two of us this week, and this is like a book that's almost hard to talk about because it's almost too perfect.
I mean,
that's my impression of it.
If you were to ask me what my favorite Superman story is, depending on the day you catch me, it's either All-Star Superman, Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely, or it's Superman for All Seasons, Loeb and Sale. And that's unequivocal. Unequivocal. Those are going to be always the two I go to. And there are a lot of great Superman stories, whether they're standalone, miniseries, like for All Seasons, or a section of a run, or something like that's pulled out. But I think in terms of capturing the essence of what I think Superman is and why Superman is important, I think it's either All-Star Superman or For All Seasons. So yeah, I think there's so much talk specifically with Superman that doesn't exist with any other comic book property in terms of adaptation. And specifically with movies. I do want to say that because whatever reason, Superman has worked on television, whether it was something like Lois and Clark back in the day or the current Superman and Lois. Superman seems to translate to television. Was that? Oh, yeah, Smallville. Thank you. Of course.
Yeah.
Superman seems to translate to television well, but it has been a harder road post. I mean, I guess Superman 2 is, the Donner, but really post like Superman 2, it's been a really hard road to hoe to get Superman, quote unquote, right on the screen. Cause I feel like the consensus is he's boring because, he's the Boy Scout, does everything right. What's interesting about that? And so everyone feels they have to have a take on him. Right. You think,
right. Oh yeah. Everyone's looking for the dark underbelly.
You have to do the deconstructed Superman because that's the only way to make him interesting, allegedly, which I totally disagree with. But it's why all kind of subsequent Hollywood adaptations, movie adaptations just haven't worked. For anyone who asks, why is Superman interesting? Why is he important? Why does he matter? I would give them For All Seasons. Just read this. This is the essence of who Superman is, who Clark Kent is. This is why Superman is the way he is. Superman isn't a story of like a regular person who gets powers. Superman is specifically the fantasy of what if a good person had power.
Right. Because
so much to take, the conversation now around a show like The Boys and a character like Homelander is, that's what if Superman was evil? And no, Homelander is what if a regular person got powers? Because it's a commentary also on superheroes and also on society. Superman is, in my mind, specifically a fantasy about what if an actual good person, like an honest to God, rare, good human being had the powers. What would he do? What would he be like? It's not a regular person because regular people are terrible. So
I think it's also a little bit of a nurture versus nature thing, which is what Red Sun did, right? It was like, he's good disposition, but this is like heartland American values, which, even at the time this was written, weren't laughably hypocritical and atrocious.
Yes.
It was like there's always been kind of a romanticized version of that part of the country and whatnot.
And that's a hangover from the previous. But again, I think the idea is he's got good people as parents. He had good people around him as friends growing up, and that shaped him when he got to the big bad mean big city. So his character, his ethos was formed in Smallville, and he was then, because he's Superman, he is then incorruptible when he gets to Metropolis. And I think it's critical in this story, that yes, it's retelling or telling a version of the early days of Superman, but it's critical that in each of the issues he goes back to Smallville, the story goes back to Smallville. Either we start there or he comes back there, in this basically this year long of him being out in Metropolis. It's important for what they're trying to show with the character, that um coming home and being rooted in that, even though everyone around him is like, no, you're destined for greater things. You got to go and make a difference and help the world and all that. He still has this draw back to the place that formed him.
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, if you want a deconstruction of Superman, not of like, you know, the hero or the regular guy who gets powers and is not a good person or whatever, but if you want deconstruction of Superman, James Gunn gave us Brightburn. That was James Gunn, right? Um,
Ooh,
in 2019, I'm pretty sure. Oh no, that
Josh
was
Trank, maybe.
James Gunn produced that movie.
Okay.
Um, David Yarovsky
Yeah.
was the
Yeah.
one who directed it.
Yeah.
But that was like literally alien ship lands in a Kansas cornfield, but the guy realizes like, oh, like these guys are ants, they're bees,
Yeah.
and I should be their leader and what. And so it was like, yeah, that's the deconstruction. Don't take the existing character and try to change it because that's not Superman by definition.
Yeah.
Superman is this person who is a good person. So
Yeah. There's another book I want to mention here. I know I want to look up the it's not the same idea of an alien coming down, but it's a book called A God Somewhere. It was originally a Wildstorm book. It's been reprinted by DC now. It's written by John Acrudi, and artist was Peter Snesberg. And it's the same idea. It's a guy gets powers. Basically, he gets Superman powers, and then you see what happens when he's like, "Oh no, yeah, like I'm better than you." A similar book called The Mighty, Peter Tomasi, Peter Snedberg as well. I think Chris Somney worked on that a little bit too. So it's obviously it's an idea that exists, you know.
yeah, but now that's the thing that's played out. Like these things started because the Superman idea was played out, but now the dark edge to it is the thing that is completely played out.
I'm with you 100%.
And I think what James Gunn has the opportunity to do with his new Superman movie is to be transgressive by doing a real Superman.
And Gunn is saying the right things and he's posting the right things. He's posting images about Superman for All Seasons. He's posting images from All-Star Superman. So yeah, they're
and I believe he genuinely loves and gets the characters.
Yes, I have more trust in him than I would most other people working in Hollywood trying to work on a Superman story.
That's high praise.
Yeah, so because I think he has a track record of do I love all of his superhero movies? No, but I do feel like all of his superhero movies for the most part are they do the characters well.
They respect the characters.
Whether or not I like them is a different story, but I think there's respect there. Yeah.
Yeah. But so anyway, I mean, I think where we should start with this discussion is I think a lot of writers have tropes, especially creative teams, where it's like, if it's King Jared's book, it's going to get like, you'll get surprises. It'll be good, but you know what you're going to get. And if you try to put Loeb Sale into that box, I think that kind of hits you with a left hook and then a right hook here. It's like, first of all, they understand the fundamental differences between the characters. Can you imagine how laughable it would be if Superman were on the rooftop at Metropolis talking to the police commissioner and the police commissioner said, you can bend the rules, but don't break them. It's like, there's just no place for that. No one needs to say that in this book, but that needed to be said in Long Halloween.
Yeah.
And then, Long Halloween, like any great Batman book, I'll venture to say, is told from inside Batman's head. It's him narrating, it's him investigating, him looking at clues. This is 4 different perspectives on Superman. None of them are Clark's head.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's critical.
It is critical, but I think it's very creative. It's brilliant. It's very well executed. We'll get into the lettering, but it's different lettering for and the coloring behind the boxes, depending on who's narrating that particular story. Yet there's still a plot that moves forward for Superman, even though there are 4 different people picking up 4 different pieces of who he is. Sorry,
go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say it all coheres into one story, but I do think reading this story, and as someone who doesn't read a lot of Superman, I think the main knock that I typically think of with Superman is that he's kind of all heart, no head. And I've had Superman fans argue with me like, no, he's an incredible intellect. And I used to think the same thing about Captain America until you read Captain America.
Yeah.
Like, but just watching the movies, you're like, you don't really get that there's a genius IQ level at work there.
He's
It's
going off of
all
gut and feel.
right.
Yeah.
It's gut and feel and raw power to do what he needs to do. Superman, I felt in films, even the good film adaptations of him, uh, have conveyed more that than anything. Like he's not going to outthink his opponent, but he will outpower them or outcompassion them or something. And I think a book like this, it's like it doesn't do anything to perpetuate that, but it doesn't do anything to refute it either, because we don't get inside
Yeah,
his head.
that's fair. But I think part of that, and that is I've heard that criticism as well, and I think it is valid. But I think part of it is, especially in comparison to Batman and what we read last week with Long Halloween, it's how those characters are viewed. In that, I think Batman, and I'm sorry, I'm talking about how they're viewed inside the world, inside the
Okay, I
comic.
got you. Yeah, yeah.
Not from the reader's point of view. How Batman is viewed and how Superman is viewed. Batman knows how he's viewed. People know, like, when he's like when he looms over them, like, you don't need to hear what someone's thinking about Batman. You want to know what Batman's thinking as he's trying to effectively intimidate this person, probably a criminal, probably some goon. Superman is all about the wonder. Superman is all about what his effect is on the world, the people around him. And so that's why I think it's critical and it's genius about this book that it's for people from Clark's life. And we'll mention those real quick here. So Superman for All Seasons, 4 issues broken down by the seasons. Goes spring, summer, fall, winter. Spring is narrated by his father, Jonathan Kent. Summer by Lois Lane. Fall by Lex Luthor, and winter by Lana Lang. But this idea that you get a better understanding of Superman based on how everyone else sees him, because that's kind of how the character is set up. There is meant to be this awe and this wonder around him, versus a character like Batman, which is completely internal, because everything you know about him, everything you're supposed to know about him is what he projects, which is the cape, the cowl, the ears, all that stuff.
Right.
That you know what his effect is when he's standing on the gargoyle, when he's flying through the quote unquote flying through the air and all that. Versus when you see Superman, you don't need to know what Superman's thinking when he's flying across the city. What you want to know is the person who's looking up.
Right.
It's a bird, it's a plane. That's what the interest is. And I think that's just kind of one of those core differences between the characters. And so Loeb and Sale get that. And so we get into Clark's head here through dialogue and conversation. But it's more about how these 4 people see and relate to the character, whether it's Clark, whether it's Superman, whether it's both. That's where we learn about him as a character through the eyes of the people that are important to him. Because I'll say Lex is important to him, in a different sort of way than like Lois and Lana and his dad are. But these are people that are important to him, important to the character of Clark and Superman.
But this is also an original take on how to write Superman, right? You don't pick up like Action Comics 300 and it's told from the perspective of Lois, right?
I mean, they have in the past, but like those would be like one-shot issues and things like that,
right? Or obviously, if you're reading Jimmy Olsen's book, then it's obviously Jimmy Olsen's take.
Yeah,
Superman. I first of all, I would have read like 5 or 6 more of these. If this was the length of Long Halloween, I'd have no problem with that.
They're only 4 seasons. They don't know what you can do about that.
I know. It's a good thing he's not from like California. They got to be one season.
Yeah, they got to commit.
He's from LA.
Yeah,
it's just a one shot. So I guess they have a rainy day every year. But I like this, just the stark difference with this book, and I think a lot of that, like from the first splash page you get, the first 2-pager, when the color palette for the book hits you, you're like, this is a completely different work. Than Long Halloween.
And the colorist here, I think we settled on Bjarne Hansen.
Yeah. I
The,
know Hansen's right.
well,
I'm
yeah,
fairly
yeah,
certain that's a Danish name because my
and
Danish
that's
made
your bag,
guitars
right?
are Hansen.
Yeah, that's your
Right.
bag, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I have a Danish name, but I don't pronounce it correctly. So
Uh,
Bjorn, this is coming from Mike Jorgensen, which should be pronounced Janssen.
yeah.
Uh, Mike Jorgensen apologizes if we're
Uh,
mispronouncing Bjorn.
but you're right there. It is, and I assume that's a conscious decision. They're like Batman's going to be a certain way, and we talked last week when we had Drew on the use of shadow, the use of monochrome.
Right. He's a creature of
It,
the night.
yeah, which is obviously it makes sense, and even in the scenes where there is a lot of light in a ballroom or the wedding early on in that there's still a darkness to that color, that there's a heaviness to that color for all seasons. That the word that comes to me is warmth, even in the blues
Yeah.
and kind of the slate grays and all that. There's a warmth to this color that just it is so visually different. In the notes in front from the authors, the creators, Tim Sale, he name checks Norman Rockwell,
I
and
mean, yeah, that one was like
which is
so on the nose. I couldn't believe I missed
ex-
it. And
exactly,
then
yeah. But
once you hear it, yeah.
if you didn't know, subconsciously you look at that and this is, oh yes, this is the Norman Rockwell version of Superman, which is that highly idealized small
Superman's kind
town
of a
America.
Norman Rockwell character, right?
Well,
I mean,
and yes, and that's a product of his era and his age, and of his creators. So, but yeah, that stark difference from Long Halloween, I think, just within these two books here, you see that sort of flex there in terms of what they can do as creators and the kind of tale they can tell. Because you're right, immediately oh, this is a different book. Like if you read Long Halloween and you had read Haunted Night and you're like, I'm in with these guys, Loeb and Sale. Oh, they're doing Superman book next. I got to pick that up. Right from the jump that this is not the same book as Long Halloween. You're getting, but and yet the setup, the construct is still very similar, right? Because they're going back to the early days of the character. So once again, it's in continuity, but it's not happening concurrently with the main Superman book. At this point in the late 90s, Superman, not a lot of major stuff going on. We're 5-6 years from the death of Superman at this point when this comes out in July 98. November, I think it was November 92. I just have 92 written down here. Superman 75, that's Superman. And what followed from there was, the Superman, the four guys that came in replace, and then Superman comes back, got the black suit, he's got the mullet, it's still very kind of a Kurt Swan era looking Superman. So just once again, the idea that if you've been reading Superman and you've read through all of this from the Superman on the past handful of years, half dozen years, and then you pick up this book and you see this version of Superman, it would be a huge shock. Just like if you were reading Batman and you picked up Long Halloween, that Tim Sale's version of that character was so different than anything else you saw, any other representation of Batman at the time. It's no different for Superman. This is not the version of Superman you see in the late 90s at this point. And it's just kind of a, in the 90s, again, 90s not the greatest era overall for comics, I think, but you're kind of caught between Crisis on Infinite Earths, which was in the mid 80s, and then Infinite Crisis, which came in the early aughts. And eventually after Infinite Crisis, Loeb takes over the main Superman title, so he goes into and actually writes Superman in actual publication concurrence. And so having this book be free of that, having this
right.
book be outside of that, to tell that origin story effectively an origin story is one of the through lines between this and Long Halloween. Because again, Long Halloween's not an exact origin story, but again, as we talked about last week, it is that tipping point of the early days of Batman, where he's fighting organized crime, moving into the area we know, which is him fighting supervillains. So it's a year one-ish story, year 1.5, basically, is what Long Halloween is. So that early time, focusing on whether you're reframing, retelling, or reestablishing what the origin, what those early days were, that gives these guys freedom to take their story in ways that the current ongoing writers just didn't have the space to do.
Yeah, well, let me talk about the other difference with this book, but I think this is less what's different about this book and more what's different about A Long Halloween. But I think the the critics of this book, Spider-Man Blue and Daredevil Yellow, and I have read critical negative reviews of each of those books. Uh, they will say like, I don't get it. Like, what's so special about this book? This is just like a bland rehashing, retelling, perhaps a sappier retelling of like where the character comes from, who the character
It's definitely
is.
that. Definitely more saccharine.
Yeah, but like, I mean, you and I have a soft spot for the like good sappiness, right?
Oh yeah.
In the Sorkinian way. Um, and for someone like me who has never shown any interest in Superman, mostly because I've seen him on screen and thought like, oh, what a bunch of drab garbage. You know, you read something like this and you're like, oh, this is what it could be. This is what it's supposed to be. You know, not to get like too prescriptive of like the definitive version. Like, as a casual reader of Superman, I don't have the power to say what the definitive version of Superman is, but I can tell you if it was this, I'd be a Superman fan.
I think the word for Superman is earnest, and there is no cynicism, sarcasm. There's none of that in the character of Superman, and this book gets that perfectly. And I think that is some of the comment, some of the criticism I guess we'll get when we, you know, move into the next weeks, especially when we're talking about Daredevil Yellow and Spider-Man Blue. Again, less so. We didn't see it as much in Long Halloween, because that is
Well, they were treading original ground there to an extent.
yeah. So Yellow and Blue follow much more the blueprint that they set up here in For All Seasons, for Loeb and Sale. But yeah, there's an earnestness that it fits Batman, because it fits Superman because that's who it is. That's who he is. It fits a little less with Daredevil and Spider-Man, as you'll see, you guys will see when we get there, just because of the nature of those characters. So, but in those cases, it's meant to be, here's a moment of earnestness. Here's a moment of real emotion, real deep introspection. But for Superman, that's just the surface stuff, because that's who he is to his core. So this format, this idea, this presentation of him is the essence of who Clark is. And thus, and I think that, part of that distinction of this book is, and it's something that they really address in issue 4, in the winter issue, the one that's narrated by Lana Lang, is that duality between Clark and Superman,
Uh,
and what that means to be Clark and or Superman. It's always, it's kind of, it's the constant battle of this character versus, again, his most obvious counterpart, which is Bruce Wayne versus Batman.
yeah. Well, and I think what I wanted to reread when I finished this was Tom King's Batman issue number 37, which
Is
was
that
the
the
double date.
oh, okay. I was going to quote a different issue from that run, but go ahead first on Double
No,
Date.
that's great.
Yeah.
Well, I remember when that issue came out and I was like, what is this? Is he like doing anything with his run at all? This is just kind of a meandering, pointless story. And I think you, uh, without much timidity, said like, well, I don't think you understand either one of these characters. I was like, well, guilty of at least one. I was like, I definitely
I mean,
don't
that
get
definitely
Superman.
sounds like me. So I
Right.
yeah.
I think you may have said it like generally to people who didn't like it, but I was like, yeah, to me it felt like a filler issue, um, which is funny because I in that like same stretch of ones there was, I think that was like the 4 issue Super Friends thing, and then
Yeah,
there was that issue with Wonder Woman,
the
and
two that
that
came
one
after
like
that. Yeah.
right, and that one like broke me. I was like, oh, this was great. This was genius. And then but I never went back to reread like what did I miss about the Superman ones? Were there 2 Superman ones?
Yeah,
There
so
were
the
2
the first
Superman,
one,
2
the
Wonder
first
Woman.
one was they were going to meet. So Superman and Lois were on their way, and they were on one half of the page, and Batman and Catwoman were on the other side of the page, and each of them were talking about the other, in very glowing ways, in ways they would never say to each other, in terms of what they respect about them, and why they think the other one is the better hero. And this is, and it's Clark talking to Lois, and it's Batman talking to Catwoman, and then they meet up, and that's the issue. And then the next one is the double date where they go to the carnival.
Right.
Which again, I I love both of those. I think Tom King writes these characters both very well. But but yeah, that was his chance to take a look at these characters, and have them talk about each other, and the way that they each view each other, and the way they view what they think their mission is.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where like having a character come out and just say, here's my essence, this is what I'm about, always feels a little ham-fisted to me.
Yes. Yes.
But
When someone comments on it, someone else says, "This is
right.
this is how I
I
see you. This is
now
how the
get
world
like,
sees you."
yeah, it was kind of a clever subversion of like, it was the way to do the thing without doing the thing.
Yeah.
In the same way, like I kind of roll my eyes in a Sorkin show anytime the main character gets put in front of a therapist, an attorney,
Yes.
and it's like they're just gonna drill down and tell you what you need to know about this character, but they're doing it in a way that reveals character as you go. Like not everything you're learning about the character is what's written. Like a lot of it is their attitude, their disposition, how they respond to questions,
Yeah.
things like that. So it's like, yeah, there's like, it takes a real cynic to not like a story like that, or like these stories. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's again, the issue I was thinking of comes later in the run. I don't remember the number exactly, but it was Bruce and Selena's respective bachelor and bachelorette parties, which was, the
yeah.
bachelorette party was just Selena and Lois go to the Fortress of Solitude and just, have a party by themselves. And Bruce's bachelor party is Clark and Bruce at the mansion. Like they watch a football game. They watch the Gotham Knights play, which the Knights are terrible. And then eventually they're playing chess. But in that moment, in that exchange, so Lois and Selena are having fun. And there's a little bit revealed about both of them, but in the conversations that Tom King gives to both Bruce and Clark, they really start to drill down on who they are as characters, and why and it's kind of like, why are you doing this, blah, 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 blah. And Clark says a line that is, to me, is the perfect encapsulation of these two characters. Bruce is talking sorry, Clark is talking to Bruce, and he says, "I love being Superman, but I hate that I have to be. You hate being Batman, but you love that you have to be."
Yeah.
And as kind of corny as that is, to me, again, that's the representation. Clark loves what he's able to do and what he can do for people, but would gladly live in a world where he doesn't have to do that. Bruce feels like a burden. Like, I have to do this. This isn't a choice for me. I don't like it, but I'm the only one. He feels that sense of burden. And so because of that, I thrive in this situation, and if I didn't have this, I don't know what I would be. I have nothing if I don't have this, but so that those kind of worldviews, I think you see that a little bit in Long Halloween. Again, this idea that he has to be the one that figures this out, in that he feels responsible for all crime in Gotham. Anything bad that goes wrong, he feels it's he didn't do his job. He didn't live up to the vow he made as a child after his parents died. And I think you see that attitude in Clark. You see where that forms in a story like For All Seasons. This idea of him as a young man struggling with the idea of what I can do, how can I help people, things like that. And the overall narrative is him coming to embrace that, is him going from Smallville to Metropolis, and coming to accept and understand what he can do and what his place is in the world as both Clark and Superman, and embracing that and understanding that, it's a work in progress for him and things of that nature. But that fundamental difference, I think, you see in both of these books, again, that were written, 20 years before, yes, yeah, 20 years before those Tom King issues were written.
Yeah. I mean, it makes my our comp to Tom King's like love of a character study seem very reasonable, which I think we did in the
Oh,
Zero episode.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, and not just that. Again, he basically takes Loeb's style, which is a lot of narration boxes, whether it's internal monologue or, I mean, what he loves, Tom King loves, is a letter or a journal entry, a letter to someone that works as narration, or a journal entry of recounting events. Uh, he loves that, and we didn't see much of that. We saw internal monologue in Long Halloween, but obviously here, whether it's like an article or a journal or whatever, these are people's recollections of Clark, and we'll see that play out a lot, even more like egregiously in both Daredevil Yellow and Spider-Man Blue. But that is clearly something, a narrative structure that Tom King borrowed from Jeph Loeb, because Loeb loves to do it, and so does King. All of his books, especially his miniseries books, Tom King's, they have that narrative structure, or something very similar to it. It's a way for them, I think, as writers to get into their characters' heads, or really get into the who they are, whether it's them talking or someone talking about them, versus, the actual action of the story. It's almost like that stuff is secondary to what you're getting from the narration, whether it's self-narration or a third person.
yeah. Um, I guess we should get into the story a bit. I mean,
Sure.
like, I don't want to we're not a recap podcast. We say that all the time. We remind ourselves of that all the time.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's interesting because there's not that much that happens really.
Yes.
Um,
It's not a book about the what.
exactly. Right. And I even found myself wondering, if you cut all the Lex Luthor stuff out, would this be the same book? And the answer, I think, is probably. But I think the reason to have the Lex Luthor in there is to say, yeah, everyone sees this guy as like
Yeah.
squeaky clean, pristine, but there's someone else looking at the same events and not having that takeaway. And
100%.
there's a quote that I'm going to misuse out of context for my own purposes right now, eh, because it was I think probably a theologian who said this, who said that, the same sun that hardens wax melts clay, and
Sure.
basic
Okay. Yeah.
and Superman here being the sun,
Yes.
and you basically find out what you are by when you gaze up at this person, you know, you will, you will be wax and you will melt and just say like, oh, he's wonderful, or you'll find out that you're a lump of clay and you'll harden into,
Yeah.
something different. But he transforms everyone he encounters, and there's basically two directions to go.
And I think that is why this book is presented the way it is, of other people looking at Superman. I think that's 100% right in terms of the read, and why they chose to go this way, because that is who Superman is. His stories so much are the effect he has on other people. And you're totally right. Lex is here because you have to have the other side. You have to have the person who, his whole thing, his whole chapter is the way he frames it, the way that Lex frames it is, it's a love affair between him and the city, him and Metropolis. And so he believes everything he's doing and the way he sees things is for the good of Metropolis. And he doesn't see Superman as being part of that.
I
And so
mean, I will
that's
be
the fundamental basis of his thought process.
right. And so it's a little surprising to me that they were able to avoid doing that same thing with Kingpin and Spider-Man. Because at least in like many,
I mean,
many
in
of the
Daredevil.
Daredevil,
Yeah.
well, I mean, Kingpin is a Spider-Man villain too, but
Yeah.
um,
Mainly, I mean, I think
um, but yeah,
I think of him first as Daredevil.
yeah, fair enough. But the fact that they were able to resist it for either of those, because that's certainly the narrative playing in Kingpin's head, is like,
Yeah.
I've been doing this longer. I have to work so much harder to
Yes.
have a fraction of the impact.
Yeah.
Like, how dare you waltz in here?
Yeah. There's a
And
resentment.
and you get to do it without getting your hands dirty, like I've had to do.
Mhm.
And that's assuming like that's the best possible version of like a Kingpin character, is someone who resents the fact that they've had to like play so dirty to get where they are, rather than the type of villain who relishes in playing like that, or doesn't know any other way. But yeah, it's just an interesting juxtaposition because part of me does now this is like I think this is what it's like being a reader in the 2000s. Part of me wants to find the sympathetic angle of Lex Luthor when you read this story of like does he really believe what he's saying like and has his net impact on Metropolis and the country been more good than bad? um and it seems like Superman is kind of like riding his tail for like relative speeding tickets here. In the world of supervillains,
Yeah.
it's like these are misdemeanors, and Superman is just shots across the bow here, right and left, at like every time Lex has a toe out of line. Um, so I don't know. I think it's an interesting addition to the story. Again, I do think you could have. I think the story would have been a lot sappier had Lex not been in it. But
Yeah. Because that whole thing with what she called toxin, right? The
right,
super fan, like yeah, all of that. Yeah, the specifics of that don't matter. It's the general idea of what Lex is willing to do to try and get back at Superman, and what Superman is willing to do to stop it. Yeah, you're right. That could have been any Lex Luthor plot. It could have been any scheme he had. So what matters, I think, is just the attempt and getting his version of it, Lex's version.
yeah, yeah. So let's talk about. I can't help but ask, since there's a whole story here narrated by his dad, what you thought of the like. First of all, I don't like Kevin Costner as an actor. Um, but I know a
Like at
lot of
all?
Superman. Yeah, not really. Something about him just bugs me. And it's not a lack of talent, obviously. It's just something about his folksiness that drives me crazy. But there were a lot of hardcore, like real Superman fans who just loathe that moment in Man of Steel where he
Yes.
calls off
Yeah.
Superman from saving him.
Yes.
Which to me felt like, if my memory serves, it feels like Zack Snyder's misread of All-Star Superman.
Well, yeah, and I think I would agree with that. I think though Jonathan Kent, deep down in his core, he would not want Clark to come and save him if it put anyone else in risk. He wouldn't want Clark to come save him if he thought Clark might be at risk. But he would never say that out loud.
Well, and my main
I'm saying,
takeaway
like deep in his
was
core, he wouldn't want to do that. But he would never ask his son to save him, but he would definitely never explicitly tell his son not to. And
that's my
especially
thing
not,
is I
yeah,
feel like this Jonathan Kent never wanted to take options away from his son. Never
exactly.
wanted
Yes.
to define his son
Yes.
or tell him what he should or could be.
And I
He
think that's
wanted the clean slate, and I think that was the problem in the movie.
yes. Yeah. The idea that like, no, this is how you're supposed to be. You have to hide yourself. You can't do this, even for my sake. And yeah, and that is not who Jonathan Kent is often portrayed being, and is definitely not the Jonathan Kent we get in this book. This book, his whole thing is like, yeah, it's you got to make the choice here. Whatever my opinion is, doesn't matter, you know. And so that's why I think it would he would never tell his son not to do something. He would never tell his son not to help those people, not to, dam up the river to stop the flood. He would never tell them to do that at the expense of anything. But if Clark decided he didn't want to do that, or that wasn't something he was going to do, he would never judge him for it. He would never say, well, you could have helped. You could have done this. He would never put that back on him, on whatever choice Clark would make, either to be a hero or to not be one. That is what Jonathan Kent is here.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's the essence of it. And I think I don't think I've seen that movie since the theater, but my recollection in the movie was that there were other people around, and Jonathan Kent thought, I'm
Yes.
sparing him from outing himself.
Yes.
But that's the choice that any other Jonathan Kent wants Clark to be able to make. It's like, you can out yourself to anyone, to no one. You can do something with this power. You can do nothing with it. You're my son, and I love you either way.
Yeah, I said that's why I say I think Jonathan Kent maybe he might think that he might think, I don't want Clark to save me here. It's not worth it, but he would never ever say it.
Right.
And
And he's kind of like, I think it's really interesting. We'll get to this, I guess. It probably won't come up in Spider-Man Blue, but he's almost like, of loving Guardians, the continuum of loving Guardians. He's almost the opposite of Uncle Ben, right? Neither of them are wrong. Neither of them are bad. They're both wonderful, loving Guardian figures, but this is not, Jonathan Kent is not giving the with great power comes great responsibility speech.
yeah,
He's like,
yeah.
I know that you have the weight of the world on you. I know what could happen to you, and I'm totally fine. I love you, even if you choose not to be a hero or do anything with this.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
my read of Jonathan Kent from my very limited exposure.
But I think what's coded in that though is um this idea of like heartland family values. You're a good person, so I trust whatever choice you make because I know you're going to make the quote unquote right choice, that you
Right.
will help people. But your reasons for doing it are your own. So that's the part that's unsaid, I think, when it comes to Clark and his dad and how he was raised. There is that idea of folksy Americana, of just being a good neighbor, and doing what's right is always what's right, and it's obvious what's right. And part of that I think is a little bit of the difference between maybe the DC universe and the DC universe heroes and the Marvel universe. But you're right, I'm with you. There's no right or wrong way in terms of how to approach this, but yeah, Jonathan and Martha are presented here in I mean, for the most part, they're presented as just really just kind of like the ideal parents, right? Just
Right.
like
Yeah. There's nothing to rebel against.
yeah, they're the best versions of those characters, and you see there's a similar characterization in All-Star Superman, where it's so clear that Jonathan and Martha Kent are they are just the best people on earth, like they are truly like the only two genuinely good people on earth, and that can great, I think. It's like these people have no transgressions, they don't do anything wrong, and the things they think they do wrong, you're just like, come on, like really, like you didn't fail,
Yeah.
you didn't screw up.
Right.
So there is an idealized version, a presentation for the two of them. But again, that it plays into what this story is trying to say, and what the image it wants to project of Superman, which really is that I keep going back to very saccharine, very maudlin, very Norman Rockwell-ish, back in the day. This is what it was like, even though it was never really like that. But it's the way we think about back then was supposed to be.
Yeah, and I can't tell, I don't know Jeph Loeb well enough to know whether he's like kind of old and believes that, or if this is just like his little salute to like, this is the soil the character grew out of, whether it was ever real or not. Like, this is what people who read the original Action Comics Superman believed about themselves as a country, believed about that part of the country. And if it's a hat tip to that with being knowing, I think it's, really well done. If he
That's a
if he really is like just a boomer who really buys in hook, line, and sinker to that, I have some follow-up questions. But
I think it's a combination of both. I like to think that it's more what you just said, this idea of we're going to write this origin-ish story. So we're going to set it in that time, there's no timeline, there's no years here, but you get a sense of when it is. This is not modern day. This is not set in the 90s, as it were. I like to think that's part of that there, but I haven't read a lot of his solo Superman run, but I read all of his Superman Batman run that he did with Ed McGuinness, which I thoroughly enjoy, and I think you do get some of that. But of course, that could be the product of the fact that every scene, every page, every panel, he's bouncing off of Bruce, So just in comparison to Bruce, he's always going to look a certain way. So I don't know how much of that is he. I can't speak to how much he actually believes it, or it is just kind of a hat tip. But I do think there is some level in which he holds Superman in on that level of esteem.
Right. Well, that and it's like, I mean, how far can you get from that while still doing the character? Right. It's like
Yeah, yeah,
if you
yeah.
drift too far away from the Norman Rockwell image, you just need to write a new character, which I think, has always been your thing is like, you know, if you want to change James Bond to be this, and not that, and that, uh, write a different character.
Yeah, yeah,
It's like at some point it's just not Bond anymore,
yeah,
and we're all fine with that. Like
yeah,
you can be in the Bond universe even,
yeah,
just
yeah.
write a different character.
Yeah, so if you don't like how Bond is, write Bond better. You don't need to change the things about him. You can just put better people writing it. You know, just get more creative with how you write it. But if you want to change and do all these things, just make a new character, or that character already exists somewhere else. Superman is yeah, he is obviously one of those tentpole characters. He's the character, and that urge and desire for every writer, it seems like, to tell their spin on Superman by, yeah, breaking against the norm, as it were, the accepted version, the accepted idea of Superman. You're right. You said it earlier. It gets tired. It gets played out, and it becomes, to me, I mean, I think it's just wildly diminishing returns. That is, oh, it's another evil Superman story. Okay, great. What's he going to do this time? Oh, it's the same thing he did every other time. Which is why I think writers like to write either Batman and Superman, or the Trinity, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, because you can write Superman being a certain way, and you don't have to worry about writing any other viewpoint because those are built into the other characters.
Right.
You
Yeah.
have
And
Bruce, you
when
have
you're writing
Diana.
about the dynamic rather than the
Yeah,
character,
yeah, yeah. And I think there are a lot of writers who uh
which coincidentally is why I don't really like team up books. I feel like you never really get great character, like individual character, like growth or insight.
you get the more one-sided,
Yes, they're all kind of
one-dimensional.
one-dimensional
Yeah,
props,
yeah,
and the chemistry is the character.
yeah, yeah,
That's why I don't read Avengers books. I don't read Justice League books. That being said, there's an announcement that will make me read at least one team up title in the near future.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. But
with the
what I was going to say is,
JSA.
I do wonder if writers are, I was going to say scared, but maybe that's not the right word. Maybe hesitant, of tackling a truly earnest Superman story, because maybe they don't know how to write that so that doesn't feel stale for them. It was something that Tom King said. He did a Superman miniseries. It's collected. He did it with Andy Kubert. It's collected, and it's called Superman Up in the Air. It was
Oh yeah,
it's
which I
six.
plucked out of a bargain bin, if you
Yeah,
may
yeah,
recall.
and it's a great story. I love it. It tells this kind of version of Superman, this idea where uh it's all about, again, it's Superman is kind of, he's aware of how people see him and what he represents to people. But it was done in these. It first ran in the in these uh Walmart exclusive giant collections, um, which were a thing that DC tried. It was collected in print, so they were like 12, 13 pages, I think, in those oversized collections. And so they were eventually collected. Basically, they were half issues, and so there were 12 of them collected into eventually six regular issues, and then put out as a trade. But he talked about one time, it was on Twitter or whatnot, talking about writing Superman, and how there was an ease to it because his moral compass, his guidance is so clear. And I think there's some truth in that, but also I can see how that's an easy guideline to follow when you're doing effectively six issues or 12 half issues.
Exactly.
I can see that can be a lot harder if you're doing, 45 monthly issues in a row. You know, I can see how writers would be like, well, let's get creative here. Let's do something different, knowing that they'll always go back to who Superman is. But I can see, I can understand the draw to be like, we got to change it up here. Let's put him in a different situation. Let's see what happens. So maybe there's an argument in that case of why writers and creatives go that route, go the darker route, the evil route with Superman, because they get bored. You know, I can see that. Doesn't mean I got to like it, but I can understand it.
Yeah, I mean, but I think the right way to do it is Russo's and Winter Soldier, right? It was like we've got the straight moral compass guy,
Yeah.
but we put him in a world where there is no, there is no north, there is
Yeah.
no south,
Yeah.
everything is gray.
Yeah.
And you say, like, how does a character with a great moral compass live in an amoral world
Mhm.
where there are no, like, you can't just side like these are the good guys, I'm going to fall in line with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
That option's taken away from Cap, and you get to see him wrestle with it, struggle with it. That's a great way to do it. Again, can you do that for 4 years on
Yeah.
a 50 issue
Yeah.
run? No,
You
you
can
can
do
do
that for a
that for a
chunk.
great
Yeah.
a
Like a,
great second movie.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, and you can do that in comics for maybe 8 issues. You can do it like 2 months or something like that, you know, but eventually it's going to, cause it is comics and it's ongoing. It's going to go back to the way it was. So, but yeah, so I can see the challenges to writing Superman. But at the same time, I know he's one of those characters that when you talk to, especially writers, that everyone in comics has a Superman story, you know,
I mean,
everyone's got
you'd be
one.
crazy not to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
everyone's got one, and they're just hoping to get a chance to get a swing at it. So it does keep the character fresh. But again, I can see how some of those complaints about the character, while I don't always agree with them, I don't believe I believe that I don't believe they're unfounded. Put it that way.
Yeah. That being said, I have heard there's some story arc out there where you really do get to see his intellect working at a next level. Which, like, I thought it completely unrelated, but I think the Flash gets a little bit of that treatment sometimes of like, oh, he's just a little bit too much of a goody two shoes. Um, and in the first arc of the New 52 run for the Flash, it was a whole 6 issue arc about him figuring out how to apply the Speed Force to his neural functions, and
Mhm.
basically be like, he's already like a genius level, scientist, detective, but now he can do that work at Speed Force speed, which makes him possibly the smartest man alive, not just the fastest. And as a Flash reader first and a Superman reader second, I always got bothered by the Superman Flash racing concept, because I'm like, you can't let Superman win that race, because if he does, the Flash has nothing. Like,
Yeah,
all he has is fastest man alive,
yeah.
and all my Superman fans are like, yeah, but Superman does win that race. Like, he would
Well,
win.
well, no. Here's the thing. He wouldn't, and the answer to reason why is that for all Superman's abilities, Superman is a human. Effectively, he's not, but he is a human with enhanced ability to the max. The Flash is powered by a super cosmic force.
Right.
Thus, part of the answer is like the Flash can power the cosmic treadmill. Superman can't. Like that. That's your
Game,
answer
set,
right there.
match. Yeah.
Yeah, that's your answer right there. Like um, when when the DC universe needs someone to run fast enough to travel through time, like it's the Flash because only he can do that. The Kryptonians, the super family can't. The Flash family can. But no, I think that's a good read, and I like that comparison there. I was trying to think what that story was specifically.
I know it'll be in the comments. Like,
the
someone will text us or
well,
something.
the one I can think of, and it's been a while since I've read it, because it's kind of a malignish story. But there's a story called Superman Grounded, where basically he loses the ability to fly, and so then it's like, what's Superman without his ability to fly? He's basically walking everywhere. So a book like that is intended to try and explore other parts of Superman and the Superman identity, you know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I guess implicitly, you think that his intellect is Achilles' heel because his primary villain is a person who intellect is all I have going for them. You know, they're billionaire, whatever. But
Yeah.
like Lex Luthor, you think primarily of his brains. And so it's like, well, why would you put a brainy character against someone unless the person's weakness is they're a little
Yeah.
bit of a dullard?
Yeah.
Um,
He
but I
also,
think,
well,
you know,
also let's not forget,
his
aside
record
from,
against Lex Luthor, though, it's like he must have something going on upstairs.
yeah.
Uh,
Also, let's not forget, besides Lex Luthor, like he also has a villain that's literally called Brainiac. So let's,
oh yeah, well, there's that, and then there's the one I can never pronounce. It's just a bunch of consonants together.
oh, Mixoplex.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
you say,
Yeah.
you say it really fast. You can get
Yeah.
it out.
Yeah.
Um,
Mr. Mixoplex. But yeah, but he's, he's a he's a fifth dimensional being, and he's more clever than intelligent. But
yeah.
you know,
So, I mean, I'm curious what you think. We didn't talk at all yet about the character designs from Loeb,
yeah,
which I think are not as like notable and distinct in this book as they are in Long Halloween. They're all wonderful. Um, but like Clark Kent just looks out of place from page 1 in Smallville. Like it's
well,
called Smallville. He
yeah,
dwarfs everyone. Like his dad
well,
looks like it looks like the of Bison Men, you know, or something.
yeah,
It's like
yeah.
he's so much larger than
Well,
everyone around him.
I love that. I love that it's like he's comically large. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no, it's I'm saying that in praise of it. It is great, but it is like stretching the realm of credibility to the point of like really no college recruiters came around like, can you dribble at all? Or like can,
No,
can, can
yeah,
you just rebound?
no,
Yeah.
wait, why aren't you playing middle linebacker, or just like you're
Oh
playing
my
free
gosh.
safety,
Yeah.
and you all you do is get the ball. That's all you have to do. Um, there's especially later as we see him in Metropolis, like he's not quite Kingpin in Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse. He's not quite that comically large. But there is. I do love the fact that he is quite literally head and shoulders above everybody else. Like there's no one who comes up basically past his shoulders. Any character he's around in town, they're all coming right up to his chest, below his neck. And no, I think there's something about that, and the idea of him being, this down home, super humble guy, and all that. Um,
And the fact that it's not an act. Like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
there's nothing false about his all shucks attitude.
And that goes back to the earnestness of it. That it's meant to show that the person he is genuine. This is who he was before he was anybody, and those, I'll use the word, those values are what carry throughout his adult life. This is the origin of that. Um, yeah, and so it I know the original Superman movie with Christopher Reeve, Superman 76, which I really enjoy. I've seen a bunch. I know there's some criticism in how they handle, and how a lot of shows handle, the Clark Kentness of it, because the clumsiness, the aloofness, things like that. I think people always that's always played as an act.
Oh yeah.
I think in the new Superman and Lois, that version, I don't think it's meant to be played as an act. I think they just kind of show him like he's just kind of like naturally clumsy, but when he's Superman, he can make up for it. It's that kind of thing. But the idea that you're putting on he's putting on a facade or an act, and so often the again, going back to the parallels between Batman and Superman. For Batman, Batman is who he is. Bruce Wayne is the mask. But for Superman, Clark Kent is who he is, and Superman is. So Clark Kent should be who he is. There shouldn't be an act there of him having to try and not act like Superman by being clumsy or awkward or anything like that. He should be who he is, And I think this story definitely shows that when you see his time in Smallville, and then when you see how he is as Clark Kent in Metropolis, starting to work for the Daily Planet and all of that. You see that it's genuine and it's presented that way. It's meant to be read that way.
Yeah, well, let me ask you a question. I think this is beginning of issue 2, right after the tornado hits, and he can't shake this feeling he should have done. He should have done more.
Yeah.
He starts a conversation with his pastor, Pastor Lindquist, and I think he's about to tell him what he can do, but the pastor doesn't have time for him because he's itching to tell someone.
Yes.
And then like 2 pages later, he's lifting Lana off the ground. Like, I've got to tell someone his first, like, can you think of anything more Norman Rockwell than the guy who's like, well, first I'm going to tell the pastor, and then next I'm going to tell, my best friend, the girl next door.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who has misread the situation, but also not really. I think Clark has always been very fond of her. I would say he loves her, certainly platonically, but probably had some feeling, at least based on this story, that like, if I had the option morally to stay in Smallville, I would totally be with Lana. But I cannot I can't deny the world of myself, which, like, there's no humble way to say that. If there was, Superman could do it, but like, I can't even say that on his behalf and have it sound humble.
But he can't go on without not having Lana know.
Right. Yeah. So that she knows it's not a rejection of her. It's
exactly.
A higher calling.
That's great phrase, higher calling. So it's a way for him to rationalize and explain, like, why he has to do the things he is. It may be the most literal, it's not you, it's me kind of thing, maybe the only time where you can say that and you can drop that and there's no rebuttal. There's no coming back from that. But he's on a level of you see him struggling with that burden. Because after that tornado again, he feels like he didn't do enough, like he could have done more. There's always that sense of him, and it's something that Superman has always grappled with the idea of. I think it's a thing he's come to terms with is I can do a lot, but I can't do everything. So you save who you can, and he always knows it's never enough. He always knows he's never going to get everything. He's never going to stop everything. He can't save everybody. And that is something that we see in his character now and down the line. So I like that they seeded that idea early for him. This idea of, yes, you can do things, but you can't do everything. And you got to live with, and if you're going to do this at all on any level, you have to be able to live with that, like they seed that into his psyche.
Yeah. I mean, I think, which will be explored ad nauseum if you read his books and probably his movies and everything. But like, the way you hurt Superman is by creating impossible choices for him.
Yes.
And forcing his hand.
Yes.
Which I do think was one of the things that I'm about to praise it. One of the things that Batman versus Superman at least got right, which is like how you get to Superman is to create this dichotomy for him where, you can't save everyone. You have to do one thing or the other. But what, the many things that movie got wrong about that movie was like, Lex Luthor was like, either you go do a bad thing and kill Batman or, your mom gets hurt. No. You make him choose between two good things.
Yes. Yeah.
That both have bad consequences if they don't happen. Like, that's how you hurt Superman.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it's like, it's so close to being what Lex Luthor would do. It's so close to being a Superman problem. And yet it's just kind of a bad cover band.
That's a good description of it. Yeah. That you can see all of the seams and you can see the path where, like, well, if you just gone left there,
right. Well, you can see, like, he read the books, but he just missed like what the tension was in the crossroads that Superman has to face.
Yeah. He stopped short of drilling down. Like he got to the surface, but didn't go like one level deeper to really kind of get it.
Yeah. But but what, like that movie's been vetted to death.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I will say, I've seen Reeves Superman at least one and two. I saw the one with 2006 or so.
The Superman Returns.
Superman Returns, and I
Yeah, it's
saw
the Bryan
Man
Singer
of
one.
Steel,
Yeah.
and I've just never seen anything like this.
Yeah, and yes, you have not seen this version of it. And there is a again, I think it's why I said at the top, I'm hopeful for this what James Gunn is going to do, because he's he's saying the right things. And again, I trust him more versus like Matt Reeves said the right things before the Batman. And I don't like that movie at all.
At
Like you could,
all? Wow.
yeah, I didn't like there are very few things about the movie I liked. So you can say all the right things, but like it all comes down to execution. But um because Superman has like the spottiest track record in Hollywood, it's understandable to be skeptical versus some other characters that have had um multiple tries at it and have been good in multiple ways. Superman has not been one of those. Superman is the one that has,
It's just crazy how many times
yeah,
Hollywood has gotten Spider-Man correct,
yeah,
and they
yeah,
struggle so much with Superman.
yeah,
But I do
yeah.
think it is that limitless power thing. And I think I mentioned to you a year or two ago that uh a college professor in like pop culture or something was showing clips from like comic books and 19 the Christopher Reeve Superman, and his students were like, "What is this?" And he was like, "This is Superman." And they were like, where are the monsters? Like what, like all he's doing is helping people. He's not like having a big showdown." And he's like, "Right, that's
He's doing
Superman."
is helping people.
Like I'm like, they correctly see what's happening, but
Yeah,
they don't believe that
yeah,
that's what someone with that power set would do.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Because it is in Superman's power to stop Brainiac from invading the Earth. It is also within his power to fly up and get a cat out of a tree. He would do that
and
and
right
stop
after he
Brainiac.
rescues his dad in this book, he
Yeah,
goes and gets a dog
yeah,
and
yeah,
lets the dog lick him in the face. It's like he's
yeah,
got
yeah,
time for that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
And it's that level of earnestness that people I think reject because they don't understand how that character like
how can that exist?
yeah, they don't think it's real. That's not what a person would do. No one would act that way. And again, it's why I go back to the idea of what the Superman fantasy is. Superman is not a normal person who has powers. It is what if a genuinely good person, what if the literal best person you could ever think of had the power to be, had the power to take over the world, but didn't. He chose to be selfless, not the regular guy with powers. What if the best, the idealized version of a human, of a person, had the ability to do what Superman did and chose not to use it in a way that anyone else would? That's what Superman is to me. And yeah, and audiences reject that. And maybe that's a sign of the times of, oh, in the 80s when things were dark and gritty and cynical and things like that. And I guess we're still in those times because every Superman's got to be dark, gritty, and cynical. That Superman Returns book, the one starring Brandon Routh, that attempted to be something more. I just don't think that was a very good movie, a very good constructed movie. But it did try to be something different versus than what the Henry Cavill movies did. It just wasn't successful. It
And to be
didn't.
clear, not
Yeah.
Henry Cavill's fault.
Yeah, yeah, and also not Brandon Routh's fault. But those movies just didn't have it. There was something kind of in their core DNA that just didn't quite land. Didn't quite fit with the idea of Superman. Yeah, their failures essentially. In terms of adaptation. So we'll see what James Gunn and Peter Safran do with the new DC universe, and I think it's a statement by them to be like, we're coming, we're doing Superman, we're doing the one that like no one's gotten right in 50 years. We're doing this one to show that we're serious. So I give them credit for that. I give them credit for that. They're taking a
Yeah.
big swing early.
So I was listening to a podcast right before we got on, and it was with a psychologist,
Okay.
and he said something I found a little surprising, which he said, like scientifically, cognitively, there's only one place that confidence comes from. And, whether it's good confidence, bad confidence, whatever, he said confidence only comes from one place, and it's how you talk to yourself. The things you say to yourself about you is where confidence comes from. And, stupid people are overly confident. They are telling themselves certain things. People that are masters of a thing will also tell themselves that, but be realistic about the challenges. And I could think one thing that you can say about Superman in this book, when he's in costume, he is a very confident character.
Yes. Yes.
He acts decisively,
Yes.
with a gun to Lois's head. He speaks decisively to Power, Lex Luthor, multiple times.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it's that DNA of like who he is at his core. He's so sure of what he can do and what he ought to do that
As Superman.
as Superman.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's much less, confident as Clark Kent.
Yeah.
And I do think there is the hilarious at page 85, which the pages are numbered in the trades.
They're not on mine. I have an older copy that's
you have the older one. Yeah, the newer one, they have number the pages, and it's him like fumbling to get his keys while balancing grocery bags.
Yes.
It's just like, every little juxtaposition. It's the same issue where he's stopping a missile
Yes.
In the sky and pulling a submarine out of the water. He's also fumbling to get his keys because he's got the stereotypical grocery bag with the baguette. Like, how many people in America buy a baguette every time they go to the grocery store?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know, but sitcoms have been grossly misinformed about the average person's shopping list.
Yeah.
But it's just like, there is no reason he couldn't take the box under his arm, stack the groceries on top of there, and hold all of that with one finger.
Yes.
But he's so intrinsically human in his behavior. Because he grew up in such a real place.
Yeah. And I think, again, it goes back to the idea of Clark Kent is the person, the real person. Superman is the mask. And so when he puts the uniform on, when he puts it on and goes out as Superman, there is a shift in in who he is and who he understands he needs to be. He's got to be decisive. I think, because I think there's a level of, yes, there's confidence in what I can do, but I think also on some level he knows that, like, if I'm not decisive, I could hurt a lot of people,
Right. Yeah.
Like, if I don't do this right, if in that situation with Lois and the gun, like, if I don't act, like, I know I'm fast, I know I can stop this, I know what I can do and how this should go, but if I'm not fully confident in what I can do, like, a lot of people can get hurt. If I'm trying to stop this missile and I don't do it right, if I'm not fully committed to this, what good is it that I'm trying to stop this missile? So right. I think he has.
Or you could be the Batman versus Superman version, which after the explosion you just look sad and fly away.
Yeah, of course, yeah. No repercussions there. So yeah, that idea of I think we don't quite see that from him, but that has always been my read when I read this book, because we see the juxtaposition of who Clark Kent is and who Superman is. That idea of, like, I have to be this way. I can only function as Superman if I am this way. The guy who comes in is like, "Hello, young sir. Like, what are you doing there? Like, be careful, stay in school," and do all that, right? And then when he's Clark Kent, the reporter, the regular guy around Metropolis, he's just like kind of a homely, dopey dude from small town America.
Who everyone reminds him of constantly. Like, yeah. Like, they're calling him Smallville all the time.
And that's just a classic Lois thing, right? Calls him Smallville all the time, but yeah, it is that I think the way they show that juxtaposition, I think is wonderful in this story, in this comic. You get both of those sides, and there is a great moment in that issue we just talked about where he's fumbling with his keys when he's lying in his little apartment there. It mimics a page earlier, I think back in the first issue, when he's like inadvertently spying on his parents, because Martha and John are talking, and he's like, I think John is like, he can't hear us, not knowing how good Clark's hearing is, but he's still there. Like he's laying on the bed, kind of arm behind his head. It's the same kind of pose. And this idea that doesn't matter where he is who he is, it's a reminder. Seeing that kind of mirror panel there is that he is fundamentally who he is all the time.
Yeah. Um, is there any other story beat that you wanted to cover? I
Story
was just
beat.
gonna say, the add-ins on the I get 2023 edition.
Yeah, the, the
Um,
the the newest Black Label printing of that, right? Is it Black Label? I don't know if it is. All Star Superman is. I
it
don't know
is
if All
not
Star
Black
is.
Label, which
Okay,
is an
all right. So
interesting choice. But
All Star is, but well,
um,
but okay, but it is the most recent printing, right?
yes, it's the most
Yeah.
recent printing. It includes when Clark met Bruce. All stories written by Jeph Loeb, so all
Yeah.
four of the
Mm-hmm.
backups, illustrated by Tim Sale and lettered by Richard Starkings.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but one of them is just a two-pager between when Clark met Bruce. It's just kids playing baseball. And then the next one is his prom night that is in the same style as Superman for All Seasons, but this one is narrated by Martha. So you get, I thought that was a great tag.
Sorry, the when Clark met Bruce, is that when they were kids?
Yes.
Okay, I
Yeah.
think that was, yeah, that might have been from Action Comics 1000, I
Oh,
think.
really? Okay.
Yeah.
Because this says it's
Or is it, or it could
from
have been the,
Batman Superman Secret Files 2003,
interesting,
#1. But it
interesting.
may have been reprinted in Action 1000.
Okay. Or
Um,
that or Detective 1000. Okay, okay. But
and then I don't know what Solo
I,
#1 is,
I
which
remember
is
that story.
where,
So yeah, so Solo was a book I mentioned in the Zero. That was the artist focused book series that DC put out there. So that is a Loeb. So that's a Tim Sale issue. Where Solo is where artists could choose to work with writers or not. Um, but yeah, that's very much
yeah. But there's
a
the
Sale book.
right. But apparently this story is written by Jeph Loeb.
Yeah.
It's a story about his prom night told from the perspective of Martha, which
Mm,
fits very well with Superman for All Seasons. It's just
yes.
another vignette
Yeah.
about who he is. And
Yeah.
basically,
And
he pulls over to help an old woman whose car is broken down. She's the nastiest old woman in town. No one likes her. Not even Martha has any nice thing to say about her. He lifts her car, out of the mud without her really understanding that he just lifted a car.
mm,
And she just like floors it and sprays his tux with mud.
yeah.
And Clark is just kind of like a little baffled, a little sad, but like no regrets.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then the rain comes down and cleans him off somehow, and that passes.
Yeah.
But I think if you're Lana, and even if he shows up in a wet or a dirty tux, I think he's still a pretty good looking dude.
Yeah,
Not
no,
a bad, not a
I don't
bad
think,
prom date.
yeah, I don't think Lana's going to care. I like that Solo story too. I like that you tied it to For All Seasons because Martha is not a narrator in this book. You know,
Which is a strange
uh,
omission. I mean,
yeah,
not crazy,
not.
but
I mean, when you think about who they did choose, again, they're only 4 seasons, so they kind of ran out of spots there. So, but thus it would make sense for them to when they return to that in that Solo book, when they return to basically the For All Seasons timeline, their little pocket universe of stories, that they would pick someone else and they would do it in the same style. That they would approach it the same way, where it is narrated by someone from Clark's life telling him about this story. So we see how this story, how our understanding of Clark and of Superman comes from how this other character perceives them and experiences it. Which is just the key aspect of this.
yeah. So I thought that was a really clever editorial move in the
Mhm.
collection of this edition.
Yeah, that's
Um,
nice. That's
and
nice.
the other stuff, Sam's story didn't do a ton for
Yeah,
me. Um, the 2 page, when Clark met Bruce, I was like,
yeah,
yeah, whatever.
yeah.
Fine, stick it in there because it was Loeb writing it and Sale
Yeah.
illustrated it. But like that's the other thing here is how flexible Sale's art can be. Like
Mhm.
I'm so used to Sale's Batman characters that I feel like I could pick him out of anywhere. If I saw some of these, especially like the fourth season, the winter one here,
Mhm.
where people were escaping the flood, and it's like close-ups of the eyes and stuff like that. I mean, that is like almost sweet toothy level Lemire, and
Yeah,
the
yeah,
watercolor pushes it a long way,
yeah,
but like kind of the gaunt, haunted faces.
yeah,
Uh, I would have never guessed Sale had that range after reading. If you had only read Long Halloween,
yeah.
I think
Well,
you'd be like, wow.
but I think also when you look at most of his characters here, I mean, like there is for at least for his younger characters, there is a cleanliness to the face. Not a lot of lines.
Right.
It's a lot with shading. I happen to be on a panel right now. One that I like is um when Lois is sitting at Clark's desk and she has the thought that maybe Clark's Superman, and then you turn the page and it's like, and it's a full page splash there, and she says, Lois Lane, that's the stupidest idea in the world. But when you look at Lois's face there, I mean, there are some, the way that Loeb draws faces, there are some like straight on views where like there's not really a nose, it's just like a nostril, it just
Right.
it's the way he stylizes them. But it works with the overall feel of it, because so much of it is in the color and the shading of it. But yeah, I mean, maybe because you read Superman obviously a lot less than you've read Batman, but I mean, I know for me, his Lois and his Superman specifically are as iconic as anything. I oh, big regret. One time, when I saw Tim Sale at a show, he had a really nice Superman print. It was a landscape print of him of Superman flying. It might have been like an isolated piece from For All Seasons. I don't know if it exactly was, and I thought about buying it, and I was like, yeah, I got a lot of Superman. I don't think I need that one. So of all the prints and all the artists I have on my wall, I don't have a Sale print, which is something that I regret greatly, that I didn't buy a print from him of something, whether it was Batman, Superman, the Trinity, whatever it was. But I specifically remember that Superman print and being like, because I love his Superman, the way that it's so classical in terms of like ridiculous square jaw and all that, and I love the way it looks, and it was such a beautiful shot. But I can't tell you why I didn't buy it then. Maybe I didn't think I could. Maybe I didn't have what it was to transport it back or get on a plane or something like that. I don't know. Whatever the reason was, it wasn't worth not getting it.
Right.
Um, so that's it bums me out to look at my wall of prints from artists that I absolutely love and adore, and know that I don't have one from Tim Sale.
Yeah, that hurts.
Yeah,
Especially since,
yeah.
I mean, how many times did you see him at a show?
I've seen him two or three times at a show.
Okay, that's actually
Um,
more than I would expect, but you travel
yeah,
for shows,
I do. Yeah,
more than I
and
do.
none of those were here. I think two of them, at least one was in Chicago, one was in Toronto, and if I saw him a second time, it was also in Chicago. But sometimes the my trips to Chicago for C2E2, a lot of those blend together. So I can't remember if I seen him twice there or just once there. But at least twice, because I know I saw him in Toronto as well. So, but yeah, he was always someone that, yeah, when he was there, was like, gotta go to Tim Sale's table because he's Tim Sale. And then, not knowing at a lot of those times, at least towards the end there, that he was as sick as he was. And I don't even know if he was really that sick at that point. Because I think for him, it was something that happened very, very quickly. But yeah, he was always someone if he was on a guest list and I was going to that show, I was always going to have something for him, 100% every single time. But yeah, just didn't get that print, and that sucks for me.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, that's like, it's like one of those, like anytime I saw him, I would have something else for him to sign,
Yeah, yeah,
almost like the way that I am now with like Jenny Frison. It's like
yeah,
there's just
yeah.
a short box
There's
of
always
Jenny
stuff I'm gonna
Frison
have.
covers.
Yeah,
If she's gonna be at a show, it's just a matter of which five I'm gonna
yeah,
take.
yeah. It's a lot more. I'm not stopping at five.
Well, but I also
I'm
kind of bank on seeing her once a year at one show or another. But
probably so,
um,
probably so. But yeah, I don't have any other story things. I did want to mention, you mentioned it at the top a little bit. I I talked about it last week with the lettering in Long Halloween. You mentioned the letter Richard Starking's. You mentioned it elsewhere, but we haven't mentioned it specifically for this book. Richard Starking / Comicraft. They do all the lettering for all the books we talk about, and I think he letters almost all of, or at least he did all of Loeb's stuff. Kind of the guy he always worked with. But in Long Halloween, he made a point of all of the narration boxes were always in mixed case, and they were meant to look like handwritten, like again in a
Right.
journal or whatever it was, and all the dialogue, everything that was happening in the scenes, that was all uppercase, which is more standard. What they do here is they gave each one of those narration boxes a different font. It's a different style, it's a different look. Whether it's I happen to be in issue 4 right now in Winter, which is Lana's story,
I
which
find
has
hers the hardest to read.
because
Full
it's
disclosure.
it's a little more of a, it's not quite it's not cursive, but it runs together a little more. It looks more like handwriting, you know. In the third issue in Fall, which is the Lex Luthor one, maybe on first glance you don't really notice it, but his narration boxes are also in all caps. But if you look at it for just a little bit longer, you'll see that it's a different font. It's a different all caps font than what's happening in the dialogue. If you get to a page where you see both dialogue balloons and narration boxes, yes, they're all in all caps, but they're slightly different. There's a it's I think Lex's narration boxes are in a font that's a little easier to read. I think it's a little more defined, it's a little sharper versus what the font they use for the dialogue. And it's little things like that I don't think people are going to most. I mean, when it goes to a mixed case or a more handwritten style, that jumps off the page. You know that right away. But something like in issue 3, that slight change in Lex's narration, I think stuff like that's great because you that's one of those things that you'll internalize. You'll see and you won't confuse it, even though it's all caps. You're never going to confuse it for dialogue because it's just that little bit of different. And whether you pick it up consciously or not, it's there, and you do pick up on it subconsciously. And I love stuff like that, and I love that they went through the time and effort to say these are 4 different people talking, so we're going to give them 4 different fonts. You know,
Yeah.
everyone's got their own way of talking, speaking, writing, whatever. So
And
we're
different
going to
colors, which I am like, I assume that's in the colorist, not the letterer when the letter boxes are colored.
that I don't know.
It's
That I'm
certainly
uncertain.
the palette of the colorist.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. But I think that I'm uncertain of. But again, you're right. That's another kind of little step they take as well, of like, you know,
It's like,
each box is
and
going
they're
to look
all
different.
close
Yeah.
to white. It's like when you're looking to do a subtle shading on your Excel sheet,
Mhm.
and it's like you want the blue closest to white and you want the yellow closest to white. It's kind of
Yeah.
those,
Yeah.
and like a pink and a
It,
yellow.
it's enough that it's not white, like the background of the word balloon,
Right.
right? And but it's also not it. It fits in with the overall kind of warmth tones of the book itself. But again, going that extra little bit and being like, we're going to do each one of these differently, and we're going to take that time to really drive the whole point here that each one of these issues is someone different. So the way that those narration boxes read are all different because each person is different. You know,
Yeah.
there's time and effort, and there's thought into the character, into the types of words and phrases they would say and use with when describing either Clark or Superman. And I I appreciate that level of like of I don't say research, of just effort, you
Yeah.
know we're going to do this and show that we put the thought into it, that it's more than just we know what we're going to say in each one of these issues. We know how the person is going to say it, and we know how it's going to look and how it's going to be different issue to issue to issue to issue.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say about character choices and depictions is I very much appreciated that Lois was like flirty with him,
Mhm.
but wasn't she didn't feel like a one-dimensional like future love interest, will they, won't they. Clearly has her own stuff going on, has her own life, has her own agenda, has her own career that she's looking out for.
Yes.
So she's like a flirty tease without being like the ditzy honeypot. Um,
Yeah.
which like if my memory serves, was my problem with the way both Gwen and MC are depicted in Spider-Man Blue. But I think there might be internal story reasons for that, and it might not be as bad as I would remember. So we'll get to that in a couple weeks.
Yeah. When we get there, but also I do think MJ and Gwen are different characters than Lois is. In terms
Sure.
of what their mindset is, and also the era in which they come from. But I agree. I think there is the way they do Lois it is conceivable that someone like Clark would then ultimately fall for her and vice versa. But you see it now where it isn't just the full on antagonistic relationship. There's a work relationship there. They're friendly. You're right. There is a flirty nature to Lois. That's just kind of who she is. But at the same time, you can tell that she's tough as nails.
Right.
She's all those. She's still that bulldog reporter. That will do what she needs to get the story. But yeah, you see that there is. It's not frosty. It can be at times with her relationship with Clark, but you can see the seeds of where that could lead to, where it could get to. Yeah, and they do it in a way that I think still depicts Lois from a place of having her own agency. She's not
Right.
just there to eventually be Superman's girlfriend and then wife. You get a full rounded character of Lois in
Out
this
of
book.
not that many pages. I mean,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah. So I think that really impressed me, and I think has probably put a more positive light on how I'm going to reread Spider-Man Blue when we get there. That end, I forgot, I shouldn't have, but I forgot how well they wrote Catwoman in Long Halloween.
Oh yeah.
I
Yeah.
remembered hating the depiction of Poison Ivy, um, but then when Catwoman comes in and rescues it, and Catwoman is never quite allied with Batman,
Yeah.
like will work alongside him for a common purpose for a short period of time
Yeah. Well, there's
until her interests diverge.
there's working towards the same goal and working together. The In Long Halloween, they're doing the first. They're not doing, like, from Catwoman's
Right.
standpoint. They're doing the first. As long as we're aligned, we're fine. But I'm not working with you. We just happen to be walking the same path. Yeah, and I think they tread those lines. And again, I think this comes from the idea that we're in the early parts of these characters' stories. So they can go back to the beginning and not be burdened by all the things that have come, all the decades of history between these two characters. They can start fresh and present something that present a relationship that everyone knows. Everyone knows how it started with characters like Clark and Lois. Everyone knows where that started from, but they're able to give it some. They're able to put some fresh eyes on it,
Yeah.
and show it in a way that is beneficial to both those characters.
Yeah. I mean, I think it left me wanting, more seasons in the year.
Yes. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and I will say, as much as I love Long Halloween, it is a long book,
It's
and
long.
uh, it was a relatively quick read. This was a much quicker read, even just time per issue.
Yeah.
But Batman Long Halloween didn't want me leaving more at the end of the story, whereas this one did.
And I wonder if after Long Halloween they're like, we're not going to do anything as long as that again. Because even
Yeah.
Dark Victory isn't even as long. And then this is 4, and when we get to Yellow and Blue, those are both 6. In fact, all the books they did for Marvel, the color series, Yellow, Blue, Gray, and White, those are all 6 issues. So but they decided to hone in and be like, maybe let's be a little more efficient in our storytelling. I guess, of course, the setup of Long Halloween is different than the rest of these books, where they needed that time to explore the mystery, because the plot is so specific and so important to the story. That is less so, as we said here in this book, and For All Seasons, and will also be less important as we get into both Daredevil Yellow and Spider-Man Blue. The actual specifics of what's happening in real time are less important than the narration about the character, and the narration about what's happening is. That's the critical part of the story, and that is how, that's the major way that Long Halloween sets itself apart, or is set apart from these other three books that we're going to talk about this season. But yeah, Long Halloween is a fun read. It's a great read, but you're right. It is long. It's a lot to get through, and it's much denser than For All Seasons is. For All Seasons is far more. It's far more of a vibes book. It's far more of getting an understanding of the world around Superman. Because you're right. The plot, the specifics of what happens, like the tornado or the flood, the missile he stops, the toxin character that Lex create. Like, none of that's super important. The specifics aren't important. Again, all those
Yeah, I
things could be
mean,
anything. They're
there's
interchangeable.
no climactic showdown
Yeah,
with
yeah.
Lex Luthor's bot,
There's
which I
yeah.
think is what a lesser writer would have felt the need to
There's
do.
no resolution because this is all about the beginning. This story ends when he decides to begin and be I'm Superman, and then we see when he says that, we get Superman in the stylized font, right, in the logo and all of that. So, yeah, it's just, it's a different kind of story, and it's just like I said, it's an incredible read, and either my first or second favorite Superman story of all time.
Yeah, I mean, All Star, just on the merits of being longer,
Yeah. Well,
probably gets it
but
covers more ground.
it All Star also has an arc. It also has a narrative
Right.
arc. Things are happening, and they're happening in order, and they're happening for a reason. And that's what that and as Superman explores those things and travels that arc, that's what that story is about. So it is a different type of book, structurally, narratively, everything than For All Seasons is. But I do think those are my favorite depictions of Superman, of Clark Kent. And they're the ones I would always recommend when someone's like, I want to read Superman, but I think he's boring, or blah 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 blah. I don't know which ones to read. Say, read one of these two. You'll get what Superman is supposed to be. This is who the
You
character
may
is.
still think he's boring,
Yes,
but
yeah,
then
yeah.
you just move on.
But this is the foundation in my mind. You read this, you'll understand the character of Clark Kent Superman. You'll understand what he's about and why he is that way.
Yeah, I can't say any better than that. And my Superman fandom still remains with like 5-star books only. I'm not willing to go through the slog of like mediocrity that I do with characters that I'm real deep into.
Mm-hmm.
But when it's great, it's great. I mean, you understand why he's one
Yeah.
of the best-selling characters of all time.
Yeah.
Um, his universal appeal in this book, and perhaps the lesson of this book is that if you read this and don't like it, you're Lex Luthor.
I don't know if I go that far. It's a little harsh. But yeah. Oh, you know what? I just had a, a little flash here. You talked earlier about the series or the arc that maybe like Superman was relying more on his brains and all that.
Yeah.
I wonder, that might have been Superman for Tomorrow, which was Brian Azzarello, Jim Lee, where they kind of try to do a Hush kind of thing. It was Superman 204 to 214 or something like that. It came a few years after Hush. They tried to do the same kind of thing where they do like a year-long self-contained kind of story. I think it's been a while since I've read that book. I think that might have been a book like that where he's got to figure things out a little more than punch things.
Okay.
I'm not 100% certain about that, but I'm feeling like that might be it.
Well, that's always an intriguing setup to me when you take away the thing that they're known for. It's almost like too obvious of a trick now, and if any of these characters that are on their 300th issue or more, that's happened to them at some point.
Yeah.
But there's still good ways of doing it, bad ways of doing it, and
Oh,
sadly,
definitely. Yep.
the bad ways are always more prominent.
Yeah.
So anyway, all right, well, anything else for this week, or should we tell people to read Daredevil Yellow 1 through 6 or the trade, however you can find it? Honestly, not the easiest book to find. I was like, oh, I own it digitally, but I was trying to find a print version, and I think I went to like Amazon, and there was not like a current printed version
Oh,
in
they
stock. So I
um
was like, anyway,
it is a
my
little hard to
Hoopla, my
find.
library did have it.
Yeah.
Um, I have it in single issue, and I have the trade digitally, so I can certainly pull it off. It was just a matter of like, that was a little more annoying than I expected.
It is. It is. I'm trying to think. They just did. Not that you have to go buy this one. They just did a big oversized gallery edition. Came out at the end of last year.
Yeah, I saw
Um,
that.
probably
I'm not reading that.
you probably don't have to read that one. It's gorgeous though. It's big oversized. You see the kind of the full page artwork. It's great. But yeah, probably don't need to read that one. It is not a book that has a ton of reprints. Um, I looked real quick here. Looks like the second printing of the trade paperback was 2011. So it isn't like it's a book that's gotten to multiple printings. And it's probably the hardest of the Loeb Sale Marvel Color series to find because it's the oldest. But it's a book that should be available. That the trade is out there. People know about this book. In fact, some of the easiest way to find it now, I believe they've collected all four of the color books into one. So it's almost like you can probably find it. You might find it easier
Okay.
in getting yellow, blue, gray, and white all together. But it's out there, it's available. If you do find the single issues, it's six, it's only six. But yeah, we'll go out and read that, and we'll look to jump across the street over to Marvel for next week's talk.
Yeah, I mean it's I think each of these episodes gets more and more interesting with the ongoing comparison of them.
Yes,
Which
you
I
can
think
you
will
can
kind
see
of
a
reach its
progression.
apex with
Yeah.
Spider-Man.
Yeah, you can see a progression in their storytelling and just their partnership as creatives, definitely.
And if we haven't had enough, I don't know. Part of me wants to say tack on like a Hulk gray or Captain America white just to talk about like what's the difference between when it works and when it does.
Yeah, I think we
At
can
least in
touch on
the
that.
collected.
We can touch on that a little bit in Spider-Man after we see the first two colors. I do have thoughts and notes on that. We can touch on that at the end a little bit. You don't have to read those. I mean, I'm a completist, so obviously I say you should read them, but I understand if you don't. But we can talk about that a little bit in a couple of weeks after we talk about both yellow and blue.
Yeah, well, we'll see if we're tired of them yet or not. Or realistically, it will probably. This is terrible. This will come down to how excited I am about the next book we pick. Like,
Yeah.
because I think you and I decided to do this series while we were 2/3 of the way through Alex and Ada, and both of us were like enjoying Alex and Ada, but like so ready to move into Loeb Sale month.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and also because we were planning on doing something else, and this, when you brought up this idea, we both jumped at like, no, let's do this instead, and we got very excited about it.
yeah, I
So
think there is a book that when we eventually talk about it, we will present it a trophy for being kicked down the road the most times. We've literally
yeah.
had it on the schedule 4 times and moved it.
Yeah,
Um,
it's kind of at this point it's almost like the in case of emergency, like break glass case of emergency. Like if we're completely out of ideas, now we'll do this one. But yeah, we always find something that we're super interested about, and the idea of tackling a pair of creators in spiritually connected work like this across two publishers and have them be superhero books. I think that idea was new and exciting for us to try and said kind of breakthrough team we had been in. We'll get back to discussing, fully independent comics and creator owned stuff after we're done here. But I'm liking our sojourn here into the world of Loeb and Sale, and getting to talk about some mainstream superhero stuff. It's good. It's good.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Please share with a friend. Give them a copy of one of these books, and point them in the direction of the podcast. And get your hands on Daredevil Yellow. Start with your public library. Go from there. I do think you will. If you like these two books, I can't see why you wouldn't like Daredevil Yellow. And in that case, just buy your own edition. If you feel like you can sit and read the gallery edition, by all means, knock yourselves out. They are always gorgeous.
Well, so
I tried to read one once, and I was like, nope, I'm not.
Well, those are meant to be looked at, really. But let's be honest here. But it is gorgeous. So
books,
yeah, if you love Tim Sale's art, the gallery editions are phenomenal. They're absolutely beautiful. So.
Great. Well, we will see you next week. Thank you for listening.
Peace.